Welcome back. Seems like you are really enjoying these episodes. You know what? I really enjoy making them too. So we are monitoring the downloads, and it seems that you have a lot of interest in human trafficking and trauma recovery. So this episode is part of the Human Trafficking Awareness series. And honestly, we are going to talk about the biggest myths of all, which is why victims don't leave. So in this episode, we're going to talk about the real reason why victims don't leave and what we call the invisible chain. The reason why we don't leave is because of the programming. There's a programming that takes place before we get trafficked, while we get trafficked, especially during the first 2 weeks. These stages include relocate and isolate. It includes you not being fed properly. It includes brainwashing stages and the completion of creating the invisible chain. What is very interesting, to this day, I get these messages from police officers who take our training and say, I never really fully understood why a Canadian victim who speaks English gets trafficked by a Canadian guy in a Canadian city who has 2 to 3 cell phones won't just leave. So this is what we are going to talk about right now. So we don't have handcuffs, we don't have chains. Why don't we just leave? The purpose of this podcast is to create this episode, and hopefully this episode is going to linger on the internet for many, many years to come. And once and for all, we can explain why victims don't leave. So in another episode, I explained a lot about the victim mindset. I explained a lot about what happens to a victim before they become a victim of human trafficking. In fact, most of our training is based on telling the audience and helping the audience to understand that we didn't just become victims overnight. We didn't just wake up at the age of 21 or 15 or 16 and got ourselves in such a mess. It actually happened accumulatively, meaning that our childhood probably had a whole bunch of rough patches, which created childhood trauma, and that trauma made us believe that we are unworthy and we live in crisis, and we probably lived in survival mode for a very, very long time, way before we got trafficked. So we basically got used to trauma after trauma after trauma. In my household, it was domestic violence, so it was very normal that there were fights all the time and crisis, and things blew up and then calmed down. It was very, very normal. So because that's my normal, by the time I'm meeting my traffickers, not only I'm always in survival mode or crisis mode, we were also always in financial crisis. So of course, we were in financial crisis. I was so desperate to find a job that will help us to pay off our bills and we don't become homeless. I was 21 years old. So imagine there's a person who's 21 years old, gone through so much trauma, has no healthy coping mechanisms. We can't think straight when there's a situation or an opportunity is showing up with full of red flags. You know, a lot of people used to say, like, what were you thinking? Well, I wasn't thinking because I had no place in my brain or in my knowledge where I can pull those healthy thinking processes out. There is no putting on your healthy thinking cap. It doesn't exist. So by the time we get into these situations where we meet these shady people, we don't really understand what we're getting ourselves into. So that's our mindset by the time we meet the traffickers. And a colleague of mine, Graham Hawkins, who works for Waterloo Regional Police, once said it in one of the presentation, and I love that. So I kind of stole it from him. Thank you, Graham. Is that it's a perfect storm. By the time I meet the trafficker, I am at the most desperate time of my life. And the trafficker is also desperate to find their new victim. So bam, I just met my trafficker and I'm ready, quote unquote, to be victimized again, as terrible as it sounds. So now that you understand the state of mind that one victim might have, and you know, every victim and survivor is completely different. Everybody's story is different. In my case, I was desperate for money. But do you know what all victims have in common? Is that we are all desperate for something. So again, I needed money, and there's other stuff that I needed, but money was basically the most important thing. But later on, when I worked with victims, and I worked with probably well over 400 victims and counting, is that I realized that everybody had different needs. Some needed money. Some just needed love. One victim's mom died, so she just felt completely alone. Her dad was working all the time. Another victim, her parents were there and gave her everything she needed except an iPhone. So she ended up going with the trafficker from a small town to a big city, thinking that she's going to work in a phone booth in the mall so that eventually she can get her iPhone. But by the time she got there, by then she lied to her parents. She pissed everybody off. She broke off, all communications, her safety net. She left behind the support system. And by the time she realized what she got herself into, it was too late. But I'll walk you through that. So again, all victims have different needs. In my case, it was financial, mainly at the time. So by the time I got to Canada, which was the job offer for me for 3 months, you work, you make $1,500 a month as a babysitter or a housekeeper. You could work in the nightclubs too and dancing, but I wasn't interested in that. I told them in Hungary. But so by the time I came to Canada, everything changed. The airport was a mess. I was interrogated by immigration. So at the time, I didn't know, but they were my traffickers. They came pick me up, took me to a motel. And in a motel, they basically told me that I owe them so much money now that if I don't pay that money back, they're going to hurt my family. So now here I am. I'm 21 years old. I'm in Canada. I don't speak English. I don't even know where I'm at physically. I have no money. They have my passport. I have nowhere to go. Not only that, I lied to my mom about this Canadian job because I'm going to be very honest with you. Deep inside, there was something wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. But I was in survival mode and I was desperate. So I lied to my mom and I made a story up to my mom so she feels better about me going to Canada. She still didn't want me to go to Canada, but I ended up coming to Canada. So because I lied to her, and you do not lie to your mother, not especially not mine, beside the fact that she had a lot of mental health issues, there was a side of her that was a very, very, very strict mother. So I was terrified that if she finds out that I lied, she's going to cut me in little tiny bits and pieces. So I was really, really scared that my mom finds out what happened to me. On the top of it, by the time I realized what I got myself into, again, it was too late. So they took me into this strip club and they said, this is where I'm going to pay off my debt. A strip club, me. I've never done really bad things because I grew up in communism. And like I said, my mom was like a drill sergeant. So you can't lie to my mom. So here I am in Canada working in a freaking strip joint. Like I said, my mom is already going to kill me for lying. If she finds out I'm a stripper right now, I'm like dead, not just in 100 pieces, but like dead, beyond dead, dead, dead. So I'm terrified. Now here I am, I'm in a strip joint and I have to strip. Bad, not good, very bad. So my point is I'm 21 years old. I'm terrified of what my mom is going to think. And I have an entire community back home. I used to work in a local TV. And so I had an entire community. People knew me. So my traffickers eventually, when I didn't start making the money that they were hoping I would make, they actually sent a fax. Yeah, it was that long ago. They sent a fax to my TV station and told all of my colleagues, including my boyfriend at the time, that I'm a prostitute now and I'm on drugs. So yeah, the reason why they did that, so I have nowhere to go back. So here are the stages on how they basically get you to a place and program you where you are not going to leave. I don't know about other survivors, but when I got into this situation, there's something really interesting happened to me. Interesting is the wrong word, strange. So the minute I landed in a strip joint, I, in a way, accepted that this is happening to me now. And I accepted that there's nothing I can do about this. And I became numb. I felt like the first night in a strip joint, something really bad happened to me. It was the owner. We ended up going to court. We lost. But basically, I was sexually assaulted. And while that was happening to me, I'd gone through this weird transition. So once he was finished, he took my clothes away, my jeans, my T-shirt that I bought back in Hungary with my mom, and put it in a plastic bag and gave me a bag, like a bunch of stripper clothes. So I went into that office as TIMEA. and I walked out as a completely different person. And in that moment, for me, I always say this, Timea died for a while. You needed a stage name, so I picked Allison from Marrow's Place. She was my favorite. And so I went into that office as Timea, the little girl who had friends and went to camping every summer and did boot camps and firefighter boot camps and police officer boot camps. And I had a life. I had a cat. I had a brother, even though we fought all the time. But I had a life in Hungary. And that represented the name Timea. So in that moment, Timea died and went away. And I pushed Timea as far and as deep as I could. In a sense, emotionally, I just went numb because I knew that Timea will not be able to handle what's about to happen. So I basically created this new personality, this new identity, and I shut all of my feelings and emotions down. And like I said, became this robot. I went on autopilot and I just started doing what I was told to do. Now that I'm on autopilot, and I just want to say this again, not every single human being reacts the same way I did. We are all very different. So survivors have very different stories. So here I am. I know something is really bad is going to happen to me for the next while. I don't know how long I'm going to be here, but let me break this down to you step by step. So human traffickers are very knowledgeable about human psychology, and they do what's called breaking the spirit. So here are the steps they need to do and able to break a human spirit and make sure that that human being will be programmed to a point that that human being will not go to the police. Again, every trafficker is different. I had international sex trafficking, my traffickers, and I had a very different bond than a sex trafficked victim who has a boyfriend who basically trafficked her. And we call that trafficker Romeo pimp, and we talk about that in another episode. But for me, right now in this moment, they made sure that that bond, that trauma bond, was created step by step. So here's a programming that I received by my traffickers. So step number 1, they relocated and isolated me. It's actually very common with all other type of trafficking as well. Step number 2, they actually stopped feeding me. So I only ate once a day. They give me an XL sandwich and a can of Nestle once a day. So I work 20 hours days, 20 to 21 hours days. I ate once a day. I was 145 pounds and I went down to 90 pounds in 2 weeks. And a lot of people were at the very beginning when I shared my story, oh, that's really not possible. I'm like, yeah, I hear you. But why don't you go on stage about 10 times a day? Now, I was skinny, but I was beefed up. I was also full of muscles. I'm just saying that, yeah, it is very possible to lose all that weight. So, number 1, they relocate and isolate you so that you have no way of reaching back to your support system. Number 2, they don't feed you and they don't let you sleep. There's a reason for that. First of all, they want to make as much money out of you as possible. And if you only work an 8-hour day, you're not going to make a lot of money. In my case, I had to make $1,500 a day dancing. It was a lot of work, But so you're working all day, you work 20 hours days, you don't eat, and you don't sleep. So what happens? Without nutrition and without sleep, you start actually becoming very weak, not just physically, but also emotionally. The world becomes very, very gray. I honestly felt like I was living through a fog. I was exhausted emotionally and physically. So now I'm so tired and so exhausted and so confused. I literally have zero energy to figure out how the hell am I going to get out of here. All I have energy for is when I wake up in the morning is to get my gym bag, get my dancing stuff, and meet them in the car, because if I'm not there on time, they're going to start charging me extra fees and late fees. So if you are late from getting to the car downstairs, every minute you're late, it's $100. So anyways, it's a whole other story. And then there comes the brainwashing and threats. By this time, you're so incredibly tired and exhausted and vulnerable, and you have nowhere to go and you have no one to talk to, because that's the other thing they tell you. If you talk to anybody, they're going to hurt you, they're going to hurt your family. Now, In some cases, the first 2 weeks is all about making sure that they break your spirit. So the way they break your spirit is, like I said, they relocate you, no food, no sleep, and they start brainwashing you and threatening you. And the way they can do that is by words and tell you this is going to happen to you, or they actually going to start doing things to you, or they're going to bring in somebody and they're going to start hurting other people in front of you. So one way or another, by this time you're exhausted, and by this time you know that they're not messing around. So basically what they are creating is an invisible chain. And if that's not enough, the last thing they do is they're going to constantly remind you what's going to happen to you if you leave. If you're going to leave the motel, you're going to hurt your parents. If you're going to leave the club, I'm going to hurt your brother. If you're going to do this, I'm going to kill your cat. So basically, that's how they create what's called the invisible chain. So it's in your brain. So you're not going to leave because you're terrified that all these things that they're going to told you for the last 2 weeks is actually going to happen to you. Now that I explained what happens to us and how traffickers build this crazy programming in your brain, let me give you just one more example. So in South Asia, the way they train elephants, imagine a 3-month-old elephant, a baby cutie pie. So the baby elephant is tied to a pose by a rope. And it's a long rope. And imagine that this baby elephant can walk around and around and around and around. And the baby elephant for 3 months knows how far she or he can go with this rope around her neck. So this baby elephant walks, I would say, 2 meters and back, and knows that that's as far as they can go, because that's how far the rope allows them to go. So guess what happens when they take off that rope after 3 months? They take off the rope, and that baby elephant will never, ever, ever leave that circle. And in the middle of the circle is the baby elephant's owner. So if you see this in South Asia, how the owner is walking and their elephant is walking right next to them, that elephant will never, ever leave. So in our case, it's very, very similar. In an elephant's case, it's 3 months. In a human being, when you don't feed them, when you do all the things that I just told you, it could take less than 2 weeks to program somebody. And that's why we call it the invisible chain. And this is why we say it in many other episodes and trainings is please don't use the handcuffs and chains in promotions. It's extremely misleading. So in my case, the chains were in my brain. I was standing behind you guys in a coffee shops. They took us to get coffee and get that sandwich. I was in the stores with you guys, behind you, in front of you. You didn't know I was trafficked because I didn't have chains on my hand. Now, again, in another episode, we talk about that too. I think it's the episode about the myth, the human trafficking myth. We talk about that. And in some cases, yes, absolutely, there are handcuffs and chains, absolutely. But majority times, when it comes to human trafficking, victims are not chained up. I mean, imagine trafficking 15 foreign nationals here to Canada and chain them up and take them in chains to work and take them in chains to the bank so that they can cash their checks. Like you would call the police right away, right? Anyway, so why don't we leave? And we don't leave because we have a programming. So that's number one, we are afraid. Number two, there's another truth to it. A lot of survivors don't talk about it because it's a shameful thing. And, I am personally embarrassed by it too. But the truth is, there was a carrot all along. I started making money. I made a lot of money. I gave it all the way. But now I know I'm like, holy crap, I've been through all this for no reason. You know what? I'm going to stay and I'm going to make this money. And I'm going to make the money for our home. After everything I've been through, at the very least, I'll go home with money. So they kept promising me that the next day, the money I make, I will be able to keep. But it never turned out that way. So after 3 months, I was here. I made all the money. I made about $40,000 for my traffickers, and I handed it all over. But I had this hope that if I escape from them and then go back to a club, maybe, just maybe, I can make the money that I really, really needed. Obviously, it didn't happen. But there is a carrot. Obviously, I got here for a reason. I needed money and I was way too embarrassed to go home. After everything I've been through, I was hoping that they will all just forgive me if I just come home with the money and pay our bills. So there's that carrot that they dingling in front of you the whole time. Hey, if you stay another day, you just stay another day. We'll make more money. Things gonna change. But they never, ever do. So there's the invisible chain. There's the fear. There's the shame. There's the guilt. There's the carrot. And also, here's another one. Why don't we just leave? Where am I gonna go now? Where? I'm gonna go to Hungary? From what money? Even if I escape these guys, I have nothing to go home to now. They destroyed my life. They told everybody back home that I'm a prostitute on drugs. I lost everything. I lost my family. I lost the TV. I lost everything that I ever worked for. And I'm ashamed. And I feel so incredibly bad for everything that I didn't call home. Everybody was mad at me. And believe me, a lot of victims leave this whole mess behind and they can't explain themselves because they are victimized. And by the time they can explain themselves, it's too late because no one's going to believe them, or they're just going to judge them. Hey, it's your fault. You went there. You knew what you were doing. You were a prostitute. It's all your fault. To this day, I have a lot of people in Hungary who still think that this was all my fault. And fair enough, I take responsibility for things that I can't take responsibility for. But yeah, so shame, guilt, isolation, all of it. It's so freaking complicated. So this is why we created those trainings. Speaking of training, I actually have this thing on my website, TIMEA.com. And I think we also put it on Heart of the Frontlines podcast.ca. We have a page dedicated for PDFs and visuals and just resources. But there's this one image that I created a long time ago that really clearly shows you all the reasons why victims don't leave. So go ahead, check it out on the website. It's going to be a human brain with a whole bunch of kind of writings in it. Let's jump back and finish this one up though. So during COVID, we created online trainings for police and service providers so they can actually walk with us through our journey and fully understand what happens by the time they meet us. And that brings us to the last point, which we're not going to get into in this episode. But, why is it so difficult for us to ask for help? Why are we being so difficult and don't want to ask for help when we meet somebody who want to help us? So that's going to be a whole other conversation. But I really hope that this episode helped you understand the mindset of a victim, not just while we were victimized, but before and how we got here. And now you really understand the programming and how deep that is that we've been through, which is why it's really hard for us to leave. And that should explain to you why a lot of us go back into the situation over and over and over again. It takes about 6 to 7 try to get a victim of human trafficking out from a situation. And now that should explain to you why it costs so much money for police and service providers to work with one victim. That should also explain why we went bankrupt back in the day with Walk With Me. But anyways, I hope this was helpful. I'm sorry if it was a little bit dark, but who are we kidding? We're talking about human trafficking. And for those of you who are on Frontlines and are interested in this training, this is not an advertising, but I know most of you gonna need to research it and Google it. So I'll just tell you now, it's on TC Online Institute website, and it's called the Human Trafficking Training Series. And you can look for it. Just shoot us an email and we'll show you where to go. Now, I tried to do my very best to sum up everything in 25 minutes that I usually train in 4 hours or in a day workshops, but I hope this was helpful. And please do me a tiny favor. If you found this information beneficial, please share it with coworkers, colleagues, or individuals, frontline workers, anyone you think would benefit from having this knowledge. Or please just share it on your social media if you have one. Again, thank you guys so much, and I hope to connect with you on the next episode.